Well, I want to welcome you to Samaritans Masterclass series. It's something we do each year where we take the key components of the work Samaritans does around the world and we share it with the people we work with in New York City's caring community, guidance counselors, social workers, first responders, parents, teachers, community volunteers, people from every walk of life who are devoted to helping people, whether it's in their family, whether it's at work, whether it's clients, just sharing part of the work that Samaritans does and so many of you do in your everyday life. On behalf of Samaritan Suicide Prevention Center, our staff and volunteers, I want to welcome you to this training session, which will provide you with an overview of the approach utilized by Samaritans in responding to people who are depressed, in distress, and suicidal throughout the world. My name is Alan Ross, and I've had the privilege of overseeing Samaritans hotline and public education training programs in New York City for over 30 years. This session is designed to share with you what Samaritans' befriending approach to helping people consists of, its key components, the philosophy it's based on, and the lessons we've learned since Samaritans created the world's first suicide prevention hotline in 1952. This is a behavior and a practice that's utilized by thousands of volunteers in 42 countries who have responded literally to tens of millions of people in crisis. So to begin, befriending is a support process. It's utilized on an immediate and ongoing basis by Samaritans hotline staff to assist an individual in coping with whatever stress, anxiety, depressive feelings, psychological disorders, illness, trauma, a dramatic or traumatic loss, or whatever difficulties they may be experiencing at the time of our connection. Befriending is not meant to be to take place of clinical, medical, or other types of therapeutic forms of care. It's designed to complement, to supplement, to fill in the gaps, to provide an alternative to available services, which is especially important for people who are resistant to seeking care, people who have social or cultural stigma to asking for help, and for people who are at high risk and are resistant or hesitant to seek formal, official, clinical, medical, government-run types of services. It's the approach Samaritan staff use around the world to connect with an individual who has experienced distress or a crisis. And it's no matter what their state of mind, what their degree of risk, from a bad day to a broken heart, to some form of chronic illness, to a psychological disorder, to economic, social problems, could be tied to substance abuse, all kinds of problems and issues. This approach is utilized as a frontline way to connect and communicate. People who practice befriending are encouraged to be as non-judgmental as humanly possible, in that it's steeped in empathetic listening, and to respect every caller's thoughts, feelings, and beliefs as we assist them in getting through their current moment of despair or whatever difficulty they're having trouble coping with. Samaritans acknowledge what the person is thinking and feeling, whether we understand it or not, and focus on the individual we are talking to. We don't focus on their crisis, their illness, or their problem. In that, you can review some of the key points in conflict resolution, which point to separate the person from the problem. This approach has proved in both clinical and anecdotal studies and research to reduce a caller's anxiety, distress, and suicide ideation. And we do this through our willingness to address their pain without judging them or how they're responding to their current situation. Most importantly, befriending focuses on active listening. One of the key aspects of befriending that's so effective is it doesn't matter what our background, what our education, what our role is. It's something that any one of us, if we're able to focus on the approach and the skills, anybody can practice this. We have people on Samaritans hotlines throughout the world who never got out of middle or high school, and we have people who are postdoctorates. Your education, when we say at Samaritans, the intellect is vastly overrated when it comes to connecting and communicating with a person in crisis. Befriending is practiced in 400 centers in 42 countries around the world. And our approach is adapted to the community and culture that we're working in. In places like Sri Lanka, where through culture and the organization of their community, it's very hard to run hotlines and to get people to come to crisis centers. So a lot of the work's done through hospitals, connecting with people who have already been diagnosed or are only getting treated. Throughout the world, there's a lot of work done in prisons and jails, working with community centers, with domestic violence programs, with every kind of program or community that's dealing with at-risk individuals. And as we know, that's a very broad basis because suicide, if we remind ourselves, is not a health problem in and of itself. Suicide is the result of any kind of health, personal, economic, psychological, social, sexual identity, any kind of problem people are dealing with that they're having trouble coping and getting through their daily lives. So we work with Parkinson's groups. We work for many, many years, going back almost 35 years, working with the LGBTQ community, with the advent of a very significant public health crisis in our history, AIDS. The correlation between AIDS and depression and suicide is very much like what we're seeing today with COVID, depression and suicide. So there's a lot of parallels working closely with chronic illness organizations, with people who are survivors of suicide loss. We talk about preventing suicide, but one of the most impactful aspects of that is people who lose a loved one to suicide are also at risk and need care and support. So befriending is utilized in our survivor of suicide loss support groups. So there's so many applications of this work. One of my favorite stories about Samaritans operation goes to Zimbabwe. Samaritans literally is practiced from A to Z, from Argentina to Bosnia to Italy to France to Egypt, Brazil to Zimbabwe. And we were at an international conference, and some of the people from the Zimbabwe Samaritan Center talked about the fact that since a lot of the rural areas don't have telephones, that it's understood that on Thursday morning at 10 o'clock, the Samaritans volunteer will be in front of the library under the acacia tree. And if you need someone to talk to, please come. In Australia, some of it's done by mail. Certainly we know today a lot of it's done online through text and chat and internet. So effective befriending can be adapted to any form of communication. To understand the approach, it's worth taking a moment to see where the Samaritans model and where the framework came from. And it's an interesting story. We'll give the short version here, but a minister in England, Reverend Chad Vara, in the early 50s, was dealing with a lot of, as we are today, dealing with a lot of social, sexual stigma, since the church in England and the education system were so closely connected. There was very little education around human sexuality, about personal development, etc. And one morning he was called to a member of his parish's house to find, to his complete horror, that a 13-year-old girl was dead and covered in blood. Ultimately, they were able to determine that the young woman had probably had her first menstrual cycle, and since she had no knowledge of her own physiology, had determined that she had committed some terrible sin for which she was bleeding, and before the sun came up, took her life. Vera was completely taken aback by this and went against the teachings and the commands of the church, and announced to his community, his parish, that he would be available because not only was Vera a minister, but he was also trained as a psychotherapist. So he announced that he would be available to talk about anything to anyone at any time. And people flocked to his parish office to talk to him. So many people that he couldn't see them all at one time. And his assistants in those days, a lot of the churches were staffed by women in the community who would basically run the operations and provide the support staff for the clergy. And so all these people would come to see Reverend Vera, and the women would say, come on, dear, sit down. Let's have a cup of tea. How are you doing? And to Vera's shock, and I've personally had the conversation with him, he's passed now, but he told me the story and he wasn't happy about it. What happened was the vast majority of people sat down with the support staff from the church. They would have a cup of tea. They would talk about how they were feeling and what they were thinking and how upset they were. And in 15 or 20 minutes, they would get up and leave before they even came to talk to Vera. And from this, he came to the determination to create a support network, a frontline network, an alternative to clinical and medical services that was non-religious, non-clinical, that was based on the best of all worlds approach to helping, but would be humanistic and behavior focused, and would be this process called befriending. And we could look at it as it's not really anything new, but it's a synthesis of the best of all helping fields. It's humanistic in that people can feel alone or unloved or isolated, no matter who they are and what their relationships, and sometimes they just need contact and connection and a sense to feel grounded. And it certainly utilizes good medical and clinical science. Part of it, the awareness that if someone has a chemical imbalance, it's not, there's nothing that you can say or do that's going to change their biochemistry, that we have to recognize what someone is experiencing, what their process is, understand warning signs, risk, and protective factors in order to be able to determine what they're going through and a way to respond. Also utilizes religious and spiritual practice, both East and West. A lot of the basis of befriending is about acceptance, is about what you would find if you read Kubler-Ross, about unconditional support, unconditional love. Recognizing, as in most spiritual and religious practices, that we have a responsibility to help people who are in need and not to judge them. So all these different areas of thought and beliefs are brought together in the befriending process. And one basic concept that the approach to learning befriending is grounded in is what we refer to kind of as excavation. Most of us are taught that any effective structure or approach or system is based on a strong foundation, a solid foundation that a structure is built on. But all you have to do is walk around any city or any town you live in and see building and construction that's going on, and you recognize that it's not the foundation that counts, it's what it's sitting in. It's what the excavation is. Because if it's not sitting on something solid, no matter what you build, will not have structural integrity. So when we talk about excavation, we're talking about where are we coming from? What are our beliefs? How do we see things? What are our assumptions and judgments? How do our values impact how we respond to someone? So there's a lot of this work, especially in communication, A lot of training programs talk about be empathetic, but they don't tell you how to do it. They talk about establishing rapport, but not really training you stepping back into the challenges in building rapport, the behaviors that are needed in order for someone to feel comfortable to trust. So in the training tied to befriending, we certainly start out with information, with facts, with statistics, with understanding various perspectives. And a lot of that boils down to the awareness of what we do and what we do not know. In Samaritans befriending training, we focus on what we call the iceberg theory, which is that 70% of an iceberg is underwater. You can't see it. And people are like that. We see someone acting out in school. We see someone being violent. We see someone crying or struggling to cope. We see all these behaviors, but they're just sitting on a lifetime of genetics and education and coping skills and family development and diet and all the things that shape who we are, who you cannot see. So a very important part of our understanding of behavior is recognizing what we can and cannot see, what we do and do not know. And a lot of that requires us to embrace this idea, which is the first thing we have everyone write down when they start Samaritans hotline training. It's not about me. We're not in charge. We have limitations. And our focus should be on the person we're responding to, not on ourselves, not on our experience, what we think, what we feel, what we went through, what worked for us. That's great in terms of our own life. But when we connect with someone else, we should be checking our ego at the door. We should be suspending our judgment. And again, we repeat over and over, recognizing our limitations. We said we take philosophy and approach from all different parts of belief systems throughout the world. There's a wonderful, there's a koan, it's a little mind poem in Zen Buddhism. And the phrase is sitting quietly doing nothing. Sitting quietly doing nothing is the concept of meditating, trying to be enlightened. So it says, sitting quietly doing nothing and the grass grows by itself. It doesn't have a literal transliteration, but basically what it's saying is, yes, seek enlightenment, yes, seek awareness, but the world goes on without you and get over yourself. So it reminds us of our place in helping people, backseat, not front seat, support, not leadership, guidance, and control. And these are very important aspects of our approach in befriending. And it all begins with our attitude, with our temperament, with our sensitivity. And that word sensitivity is used a lot. And in befriending, we remind ourselves that sensitivity, the definition of it, is the ability to receive signals. And we can't be receiving signals, we can't be listening, we can't be responding if we're caught up in our own thoughts, our own beliefs, what we think should be happening. We're hearing what we want to hear, we're hearing what makes sense to us. So all our filters are actually stopping us from being directly connected to what someone is saying, what they're thinking. So it's not just what we do, but how we do it. And that's a very important aspect of the Samaritans befriending process and how we change. Part of that begins with challenging our preconceptions. We look at the concept of what is helping. How we determine what helping is impacts how we respond to someone. If we think helping is making someone feel better, then when we're connecting with them, our focus is on what can we find that will bring immediate response or alleviation. Now, it can seem counterintuitive. Why wouldn't you want people to feel better? But if someone's feeling depressed and overwhelmed, instead of meeting them where they are and trying to get them to feel some other way or to get someplace else, that's control, that's power. That's trying to direct someone instead of holding their hand where they are, moving at their own speed, meeting them where they are. So a lot of that, again, that acceptance, these are great phrases to say, I'm accepting, I'm sensitive, I'm self-aware, but there are so many ways where our own values, things that work for us, get projected on trying to respond to someone else. A great example is many of us have been taught by our family that there's always options. And that can work for us if it does work for us, but it doesn't mean it works for other people. And to presuppose somebody has options when they don't think it or they don't feel it, again, turns helping into more of an adversary relationship than a support one. So these are things we're constantly reminding ourselves as we go through our training and look at our ways of responding to people. We pay attention to the myths and misconceptions tied to mental health and suicide, and certainly the role of stigma. You know, no matter what people's education, a lot of people still have a hard time talking to someone about feeling suicidal, about what they're going through. We hear mental health professionals all the time saying, I don't want to bring that up. I don't want to give them any ideas. So it's important for us to be grounded in what we call reality-based understanding that you don't plant ideas for suicide in someone's mind. Talking about suicide doesn't make someone suicidal. It may open the door where they express their upset, their depression, their anxiety, their helplessness and hopelessness, but it didn't create it. And certainly part of that, and every one of these issues has many more layers to it, is the role of stigma. Recognizing that people who are depressed or overwhelmed feel marginalized, feel vulnerable, feel fragile, feel ignored, feel angry. There's so many aspects of what it's like to be on the receiving end of stigma, whether it's tied to mental health or sexual identity or age or whatever it might be. Someone responding to you in a way other than how you feel or see yourself, which is a tremendous barrier to overcome to helping people who are depressed and in distress. It's not by accident that SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, the federal government's mental health agency, tells us that as many as 50% of the people who experience a psychological disorder, and the experience of a psychological disorder is a serious warning sign for self-harming and suicidal behavior. 50% of the people who experience a psychological disorder never receive help, care, or treatment of any kind. So again, reminding ourselves that the myths and misconceptions, the stigma, the preconceptions people have become obstacles, become barriers for people even seeking help. So it just behooves us that much more to be open, to be accepting, to be non-judgmental, to check our own thoughts and feelings, to remind ourselves it's not about us. So these are all things that we try to do as we learn to approach this process of befriending. And one of the key ways we do that in training is to understand the crisis experience from the person who's experienced the crisis point of view. And we're going to take a moment and actually share that exercise and do it in this session. So if we can put it up in chat, please. What we want you to do is we're going to take a few moments and start by thinking of a time in your past, not now, but in the past, when you felt overwhelmed, when you felt depressed, when you felt that things would never get better. A time in the past when you experienced a crisis, when you felt helpless or hopeless or overwhelmed, and you felt things would never get better. Take a moment and answer the questions on this learning from our own experience sensitivity exercise sheet. We'll pause for a moment and give you a chance to look at that. Again, this is something that you're doing it personally, no one's seeing it, but you're reminding yourself of your own experience, how you experienced the crisis physically, emotionally, what your thoughts and feelings were when you were dealing with that, the challenges you faced, especially what happened when you reached out for help. What turned you off? What shut you down? What made you regret seeking help? So try to get back to having been through that experience yourself, which gives us awareness of the crisis experience, not from an outsider looking in, but through identifying what it feels like to be depressed, overwhelmed, and having trouble coping. So the first question that's asked is, how did you experience a crisis physically, emotionally? And we've been asking this question to tens of thousands of hotline volunteers and mental health professionals for over 30 years. And people always talk about the fact of feeling a change in their normal behavior, having trouble sleeping, having trouble eating, feeling rapid heartbeat, or feeling exhausted and lethargic. People talk about losing interest in their normal activities, not wanting to get out of bed, not wanting to deal with work or friends or family. People talk about actually feeling nauseous, feeling lightheaded, feeling chest pains, having trouble respiration. Basically, it's almost like the emotional flu. Many of the experiences, and as we've gone through the pandemic, those are a lot of the feelings we went through, even if we weren't diagnosed. The tension, the anxiety, the fear, the worry about tomorrow, having trouble accepting things that you maybe accepted before, and emotionally, going through the point of feeling disconnected, or always angry, or feeling that there was no way things were going to improve, worried about finances, worried about family, feeling scared. One of the ones we talk about all the time is the concept of feeling hopeless. And many times we use these words, but we don't stop to think of what they really mean. Feeling hopeless, having no hope. Things will never get better. There's no chance for improvement. We want to remember this when we're responding to people. And that's, again, at the heart of befriending, recognizing it's not what we think, what we see. We may see someone who has a loving family, who's in a great relationship and has a nice job. But if their perspective is they're alone, they're overwhelmed, they're a failure, it's not what we think. It's from their perspective. And whether it's real or imagined doesn't matter. People's experience is based on how they see things. So these are important things to remind ourselves how when we were in crisis, we felt nobody understood. And the thoughts and feelings that we went through on a daily basis and how they interfered in our ability to go to work, to live our life, to keep our apartment clean, to take care of our pet, to have good relationships with our friends and family, to do our homework, to do a project we're working on. We lost interest in art. We don't practice music anymore. We stopped running. Just all the things that become difficult to maintain our daily behavior. And then the problems we had when we reached out for help and we tried to talk to people, and a lot of wonderful, caring people, they don't like to see us in pain. So instead of accepting where we are or being able to listen to what we say, they try to cheer us up, try to make us feel better, which again can seem like a positive thing. But if the person we're talking to is feeling isolated and alone and scared and in the dark, and we're saying, oh, come on outside, it's wonderful outside, it's bright and cheery, in a sense, we're not understanding or being sensitive to where they are. We're trying to get them where we think they should be, instead of being responsive to where they are at this time and meeting them at their place, their perspective, and supporting their ability to cope. We're not saying push it further and say, yes, life is terrible, it never is going to get better, but it's, when we talked about active listening, from what you're saying, you're really feeling like there's no way for things to improve, and that the way things are going, you feel stuck and alone. How are you dealing with that? Not you should be doing. So connecting with people where they are and being aware of the things we say and do that we mean well, but in fact are counterproductive. Come on, cheer up, snap out of it. Things will get better. I went through this, of course, we always put focus on ourselves. When I had this happen, I did this. Well, the person in crisis, and when you were in crisis, was like, yeah, but I'm not you. So all the things that we tell people that in a sense are avoiding or failing to acknowledge or to validate how they're feeling. So these are all important things for us to remember when we're talking to someone, when we're befriending someone, of what they're going through, what their state of mind is, what their experience is, so that we kind of stop ourselves from going to places that are looking for a quick fix to give answers. Befriending is a support process. It's not a problem-solving model. We can tell you from working on the hotlines, talking to tens of millions of people, most people's situations and circumstance that have them experience depression, trauma, substance abuse, all these types of things are not problems to be solved. They're states of mind that took a long time to develop, may have come from genetics. They may, people have a genetic predispositions toward alcoholism, they have genetic predisposition towards depression. Nothing you say or do is going to stop someone from being bipolar. We know this from our own experience when we've had a dramatic or traumatic loss. Nothing anyone's going to say is going to bring that person back. So again, the idea of meeting someone where they are is at the heart of befriending, instead of trying to get them to go someplace else. And frequently we want them to go someplace else, so we feel we're accomplishing something. And again, it becomes about us. The simple phrase, are you feeling better? It's not a sympathetic, supportive statement. It's actually a controlling statement that says, are you feeling better? It's a close-ended question that has an implication of you should be saying yes, you should be feeling better, which is basically, have I helped you? And again, it puts the focus on us. Now, all these issues, when we look at active listening, when we look at the basis of how we help people, there's many more layers to this, but befriending requires us to be aware of our predisposition towards trying to fix it, solve it, tie it in a knot. It reminds us that people are not mysteries to be solved. Talking to them is not exploring clues to figure out riddles. People are complex. They are multidimensional. Nobody is one thing. And when we try to dissect someone and figure out what's going on, again, it's about us trying to understand, not about connecting with them, supporting them where they are. From this, we come up with what we call the keys to being a befriender, how to practice this. And we use these phrases and these concepts to remind us, in the same way people in religious and spiritual circumstance have biblical passages, or from the Talmud, or from Islamic practice, or from Zen practice. We have phrases, we have concepts that help us remember, turn the other cheek, phrases about acceptance. There's one of my favorite lines is one from Shakespeare, from Hamlet, about how you should treat people. And there's this line where the chancellor is this old man who's very judgmental, and he says, well, I will treat them according to their worth. And Hamlet goes, no, no, sir, treat them much better. Treat every man according to his worth, and who amongst us would escape whipping? So we remind ourselves of the universality of people's experience and not to judge it and not to decide what is right or what is wrong. One of our phrases and approaches comes from Buddhism, which is have great respect for that which you do not know. There's so many things about people with their experiences. In Samaritans training, we focus on the fact there's so many things we don't even know about how we think and feel. We come up with explanations of what makes us feel comfortable or what makes sense, but people can go through 20 years of psychoanalysis and not come to terms with what's motivating them or what's causing certain reactions. So it's a very important aspect of recognizing that which you do not know. If you look back to the iceberg, most of us don't know our genetic background. We don't know that we have a predisposition towards substance abuse or towards mental health problems, or we don't know what our environment was growing up, or the internal coping skills that we learned or didn't learn from our family. There's so many things that we do not know. Befriending says it's a strength to recognize what you do not know, not a weakness. Clearly, that's all tied to that concept of it's not about me. It's not what I think. It's not what I feel. It's not how I see it. We see things from our perspective. And we talk about this a lot of time when we look at active listening training and recognize that people say what they think they think, what they're trying on for size, what just comes to their mind, or what they think they should say to us. We hear what we want to hear, what makes sense to us, what fits our framework, what we're looking for, or just what catches our attention. There's no absolutes. There's no, quote, truth. Everything is fluid. Everything is changing. We talk to someone in the morning, they feel a certain way. We talk to them in the afternoon, they feel a different way. We talk to someone who's depressed and overwhelmed before they take their medication. After they take their medication, they feel different. After they take their medication and feel different, then they start getting the side effects from the medication and they feel even different again. Everything's fluid. Everything's moving. When we try to put things in a fixed point, when we try to define them, there's a line from Wordsworth, we murder when we dissect. So we remind ourselves of this. We start every hotline training with the statement, you don't solve other people's problems for them. It's hard enough to handle your own. You don't save another person's life. You help him or her get through a moment, this moment, now. We're connecting with someone now. We're responding to them now. We're not fixing or changing the past. We're not preparing them and designing so they're prepared for the future. We're connecting with them now. It's life-saving work, lifeguard work. When someone is trained to be a lifeguard, they don't go out and try to catch someone who's drowning and stop them and teach them how to swim. Their first focus is to connect with them, to stabilize them, and from there to make a judgment of what the next step is. So we very much focus on being in the present, being with the person where they are now. And part of that is our concept of just because you don't understand someone, that doesn't make them wrong. A lot of times people try to make sense of what's going on, and making sense of things is a very limited activity. And we can only use what we know, and the amount we don't know is obviously very extensive. A lot of times we think of ourselves as caring and sensitive, as responsive people, and therefore we think what we believe and how we're seeing something is justified. And we do judge, even the most caring of us judge. So again, the befriending practice comes back and reminds ourselves that we're all judgmental. We all have ways of seeing things. We see things to our own best or worst benefit. It depends on how we're wired or what the circumstances is. So we constantly reminding ourselves, but just because it doesn't make sense to us, just because it seems counterproductive, because it seems irrational, that doesn't make the person wrong. You talk to thousands of people on hotlines and you come to the awareness that whether it makes sense to us or not, what people are going through They feel deep inside them. It's part of who they are and how they see things. And the only way to connect with them is where they are, not where we think they should be. Another one of the precepts is no body is one thing. When we label someone, we dismiss. Now, we know in the world we're living in, it's so important, for instance, in the LGBTQ community, it's so important that we recognize what people are going through and what their challenges are. People in uniformed services, in the military, very high risk for self-harming and suicidal behavior. So of course, we're looking at them as veterans or police officers, or unfortunately, statistics for young women with self-harming and suicidal behavior is rising at a very dramatic level. And if we looked in New York City at the YRBS, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, we see that the highest risk group for suicide attempts in New York City is Asian, young Asian females and young Latina, young Hispanic females. So there's reasons that we look at things, there's reasons that we look at categories and populations, but nobody is gay, nobody is Hispanic, nobody is divorced. Somebody can be a police officer who's dealing with their sexual identity, who's lost money from time off the job, who's having relationship problems, and has a predisposition toward substance abuse. People are multifaceted. We don't want to look at people in a singular lens with a singular identity. People are much more complex, have much more dimension. And again, we want to remind ourselves that nobody is one thing. Tied to that is perception is everything. If I feel I've got no choices, if I can't see a way out, if I think no matter how beautiful or handsome or successful or attractive or popular I am, that I'm not, that's how I see it. We've all had friends who we thought were, again, attractive or successful or accomplished or surrounded by loving people, and they talk about how horrible their life is. And when we say to them, oh, but look at what you have, all we're doing is putting up a bigger barrier, a bigger obstacle, and convincing them that we can't approach them or see things from their perspective. So we remind ourselves, whether it makes sense to us, whether we think it's irrational or someone's letting their imagination get away with them, that how people see things is real. People take their own lives because they think they're alone. People take their own lives because they think they have no options, whether we think they have options or not. It's not about us. None of these concepts are singular. They all interconnect. And that ties us to the understanding that you never know what anyone is thinking. You never know what anyone is feeling. And when you think you do, it's not about them, it's about you. You never know is at the heart. Again, we don't see this as a weakness. We don't see this as limiting us in helping people. It reminds us we don't have to know. We don't have to understand. It doesn't have to make sense to us. We can connect with someone where they are if we're open, if we're accepting, if we're communicating effectively, and connecting with them at this moment in time where they are with what they're presenting to us. For years, though we present ourselves as non-clinical, countless mental health professionals, clinicians have pointed to the fact that is at the heart of good clinical practice and counseling. So again, we're working from all worlds. All of it sits, the nexus, the connection for everything is our ability to connect with people and communicate. And one of our phrases is we listen to ease the pain of daily life, not to change it. We don't listen for a goal, for a cause to get somewhere. We listen, and if we use active listening effectively, we help people get their thoughts and feelings out. We provide alleviation, what the Greeks called catharsis, emotional support release, pressure release. Throughout history, I'm a big jazz fan. the ring shout dances of the Dahomey tribes in Africa, which morphed into jazz. Communities would get together and they would dance and they would shout and they would share emotions and they would have this cathartic. They would get their stuff out. They would get their feelings out. They would share with community. And it is good mental health, the same way a lot of us practice athletic or creative or artistic things as a release for our own challenges and difficulties. At the heart of active listening, you can't be listening if you're doing all the talking. We know this from our own experiences. We know it from working with counselors. We know it from working with caring parents and teachers. So many times we're uncomfortable with what people are saying, what they're expressing, what they're feeling, and we do most of the talking. And a lot of that's tied, when we study active listening, to using incorrect, there's the science of communication. Using proper active listening tools helps someone connect and bring out their thoughts and feelings and have that alleviation and cathartic experience. Using the wrong tools actually stifles and inhibits people from talking. We tend to be close-ended in our conversation. You said you were alone and you wish you had someone to talk to. Isn't there someone you can talk to? Have you thought of talking to your parents? Have you gone to a counselor? Do you think it would be a good idea to get professional help? The person has said, I wish I had someone to talk to. The active listening says, don't be a problem solver. Don't be close-ended. You said you wish you had someone to talk to. What is it you want to talk about? We don't recognize that in our communication, in our language, we try to fix it, solve it, direct it, take it somewhere. Active listening requires us to put the focus on the person we're connecting with, and again, be process responders, not directive problem solving. And that idea of you can't be listening if you're doing all the talking, that also means inside our mind. A lot of times, and it can be counterintuitive, we care, we're concerned, we're trying to understand, and we're going, oh my God, what am I going to say? This is such a sad situation. Oh, it reminds me of a friend I have. I remember this. I don't know how to fill out where to refer this person, all these things. And inside our mind, we've got all these voices going on. So we can't, back to sensitivity, we can't be receiving the signals we're getting from what someone's saying because we have so many filters and so many blocks that by the time we take in what they're saying, it's been altered to what works for us, what makes sense for us, or now it's in our frame of reference and no longer in the person we're talking to. This takes us to this concept that acceptance brings relief from pain. There's an aspect of accepting people, of acknowledging, of validating. I think I'm going crazy. Nobody understands. And the hotline language becomes, it sounds like you're going through such a difficult time. It must be so hard to feel that nobody is listening to you, that nobody understands. You know, how are you dealing with that? What is it that makes you feel nobody understands? Giving them, not to fix it, not to make sense of it, giving them the chance to get it out. So acceptance is one of the great tools in connecting with people, providing support and alleviation. A key component of all this, again, is the a power of positive thinking. Never be positive, never be wrong. Never think you know, never have it defined, never present absolutes, never decide what it is, never deal in absolutes. Always look at things as fluid, always recognize your limitations, and always be open to more input and feedback and to explore. The befriending process is an exploration process, is a connection process, is a grounding process. If done properly, no matter where the person was, at the minimum, they were alone, now they have someone to talk to. At a minimum, all the thoughts and feelings were going through their head, at least now they could get them out. Not to fix it or solve it, but just pressure relief, stop the balloon from bursting. So there's so many aspects this that are so important in our responding to people, which is why befriending has become such an effective approach in countless cultures throughout the world, in countless settings, with every kind of person, population, issue, and has made Samaritans practices utilized in so many environments. And we hope that it's something that you too can learn more about. There's more to come in terms of looking at these approaches to helping people. And we invite you to other Samaritans workshops and seminars and webcasts to share what we've learned with those of you working on the front lines of New York City's helping community. Well, we have every week this month another masterclass workshop. We hope you'll join us. Tell your friends and colleagues. We want to share. We want to be part of the community and help people to help others. And we certainly appreciate you taking your time today to join us. Thank you so much.